This is the Long Letter Podcast, episode 15. We are continuing the discussion on the book, Grace Can Lead Us Home, A Christian Call to End Homelessness. I am joined by my co-host, Nate Judd, and we have two guests today, Troy Westergard and Patty Howard. I did it. I got all the way.
Good job. You got everybody.
I'm so proud of myself for getting that intro right. Anyways, and so icebreaker time.
Quits there.
Yeah, no, it's all downhill from here, both in quality and in effort. We'll do a little icebreaker. Least favorite fruit and why? Go, Nate.
Least favorite fruit? Cantaloupe.
Really?
I just don't. I'm not really a
Texture,
any kind of melon. I don't even really like watermelon.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one.
It's just got a weird texture, and usually the flavor to me is just doesn't pack the punch that I need for other fruits.
You need punch from a fruit? All right. Troy.
Weird.
Yeah, it's weird. Least favorite fruit and why?
Probably an apple.
Why? You're in the wrong state for...
I know that, but it's just hard to eat.
It's just hard to eat.
Yeah.
I like how you're a man of many words.
Me too.
It's great. All right, Patty, what do you got?
Kiwi.
Kiwi?
Entirely too much trouble to get to the edible part.
Oh, I think I'm going to win with mine then. Pomegranate. The return on investment for a pomegranate is ridiculous.
I'm with you. Yes.
It's like if God created a fruit just to make people mad, that's what it would be.
Yes.
Is pomegranate. So
Okay.
I don't know that I've ever eaten a pomegranate though. So
one does not eat a pomegranate.
You eat the seeds.
You break the seeds open, you suck the fruit off the seeds.
Yeah. It's the opposite of any actual fruit.
And it's trying to like break it in the market where cranberry is, and it really needs to find its own niche, I think. So,
yeah. Where they just combine the juice with everything.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
All right. So this chapter is chapter 4, Grace Can Lead Us Home, Community and Solidarity. And so he opens this chapter, and I kind of want to point out that you just have to keep the title of the chapter in mind. The community and solidarity part is what all these things are in reference to. And so he starts with encampments, but it's not about just encampments. He covers various different topics. But community solidarity starts out with encampments. And he starts with the story of Echo Park Lake in LA, where there had been an encampment there. And there was, as encampments seem to generate issues and things like that. And so the city councilor in charge of that area, I guess, the way he says it, closed it for renovations, put a fence around it, and then had SWAT team remove people within like 24 hours. And he uses this as an example of kind of like what not to do in terms of encampments. And it kind of jumpstarts this whole discussion on community and solidarity, like how we handle this type of situation. One thing he points out is that the camp was it sounds like it was pretty well self-organized. It had like advocates working with it. They were trying to get like trash services as well as bathroom services. That was kind of met with derision, and then obviously the problem gets worse from there, and so on. And so he looks at this sort of displacement as kind of the thing not to do or the way to approach this particular problem.
And this is a pretty extreme example. 400 LA police officers come. I mean, it's like, it's not just a subtle, like we're going to do a little sweep.
Force.
Yeah, it's like a major, drama.
Yeah,
unfolding
actual
there.
Like displacement, like a big thing. And so he gets into encampments, and that's where we'll start. But one thing that I thought right off the top that he gets into was, one, the unease that encampments make for a community. It is difficult to see encampments. It's difficult to see homeless people. That an area has enough homeless people to make an encampment is a not fun experience in a community. So I don't think you have to take this sort of like doe-eyed response to it. I think we can see that encampments exist in the absence of other options. And in the absence of those other options, how we work with encampments says a lot about how we move forward in a community with solidarity and so on. He says, encampments are crucial to the well-being and survival of people experiencing homelessness. So I thought it was cool because he points out that they're still experiencing homelessness. They're just living in an encampment.
Right.
It's not like their status has changed from, well, I was homeless, but now I've got to join an encampment and my life's so much better. It's still considered homelessness.
Right.
Were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, advocates for the homeless, they're not out there saying, we need more encampments. Right? Like, that's not how, it's just...
Nobody's advocating for encampments.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's...
for more of them.
Yeah, it's like for lack of a better option, I guess, is the thing to always kind of take home. So, like, displacing an encampment when you have nowhere for those people to go, or your housing affordability or availability is an issue, you've just squeezed a balloon. Nothing's been solved. You've just moved it or made it not in this one place anymore, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've made it in a whole bunch of places, and people who were receiving services from people who would go to the encampment have now, they're off the radar. And you have to now go find them to try to get them services that they had access to when they were all in one place. Yeah,
and he points that out, where encampments serve, one, as a self-organizing agency of the people that belong there. He says here, I do not mean to cast encampments as uniformly supportive utopias. As with any given community, churches included, a variety of structural and interpersonal dynamics can combine to make an encampment either healthy and vibrant or toxic and dangerous. However, the ability for unhoused people to develop communities and networks of support, which is a critical part here, within and among themselves should be recognized and supported rather than scorned. More to the point, if our primary reaction to these communities is antagonism, whether structural or personal, their ability to become healthy and vibrant is stunted. So I want to kind of reiterate that his support of encampments, this vibrant and, healthy encampment, is always toward the goal of this encampment not existing, of finding housing and getting people where they need to go. So once again, not a defense of encampments, more of a recognition that this is just where we're at. We have to find ways of mitigating that.
Recognition, too, like people are meant for community. And in a community that, for folks who are marginalized, for folks who are on the outs, an encampment does end up providing them a space to belong, in a sense. And I think of our community, they don't, just think of how much energy is invested in saying they're not from here. These are not our people. And so for people who are experiencing that, encampment can, in some sense, bring some community and solidarity.
Yeah, and he talks about for one particular population, we'll get into that, but most people that find themselves in homelessness stay near or close to where they had been previously housed.
Yeah.
The exception would be LGBTQ people who typically are not only kicked out of their house, but usually ostracized from their community, and they move to usually a metropolitan area or somewhere where they'd be more accepted. We can get into that. Nate, don't jump ahead. Okay?
I didn't. Yeah. You said that.
He goes on. He says, sadly, we let our fear and resentment of encampments lead us to pursue criminalization and displacement. Through a variety of anti-homeless laws, cities and states and provinces and neighborhoods prevent people experiencing homelessness from being able to establish a consistent home base. This goes into what you're saying, Patty. When we choose to displace people, belongings such as medicine, identification, and paperwork required for housing get lost in the shuffle and discarded. When communities are scattered, people become isolated and distrusting of services, losing faith that anyone is interested in actually helping. So that's kind of his start on the whole encampment thing. Now, Nate, you've been working in the CBER program, getting people into housing and stuff, but Troy and Patty, you both work with the encampments weekly, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, what is he saying here that resonates with your experience or what you've seen as you've been out there every week trying to provide services and help in that issue?
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, you did get him to say something. So
I did.
That's a huge...
Hey, that's my goal for tonight. No, community is so important. And I think, and Troy, you can certainly put your perspective on this. I think pre-COVID, the camp, the Blakesley, that we go to most regularly, was much more of a community, much more supportive of one another. During COVID, where we were all isolated even within our communities, and it changed all of our brains. It changed all of our social mannerisms. It changed the entire social structure of the world, and the camp has become less of that type of a community as people have changed. And
but that's a microcosm of the community as a whole, too.
Right, exactly.
That aggression and that
Yep.
sort of like stuff that you're picking up on.
Yep.
That's not just, limited to the homeless population. I mean,
Right.
I think culturally we're seeing this sort of spectrum and divide of people lining up on sides and so on.
And they are coming back around now to be more of a community again. So it's been hard to watch that transition from community to a bunch of isolated people, but it's nice to see them coming back to more community, helping each other out. And I mean, we have people who will come up to us for lunches and say, well, so-and-so and so-and-so can't get here, so can I get them some lunches? Well, absolutely, You can. Oh, thank you so much. So people are working much more together than they were for a while.
Yeah, and it's been felt. I know it's been felt for me. Excuse me. There's that sort of alienation that COVID brought about, regardless of where you stood on COVID or lockdown or the government or anything like that. At the end of the day, it was a stressor put on people that had real repercussions that I think we're still going to feel for a while. And it's not surprising to see it reflected in different parts, and we see that in kids as well, and the missed schooling and even the, academically how kids are doing that went through that. Like, it's just been rough all around. Anything else? You guys good?
But
Yeah.
you see that though. You see it every week, and
Yeah.
I've only been out with the SSP one time, but I do recall like somebody coming in and they were picking up stuff for multiple people because they couldn't be there that night,
Right.
and that does resonate with what he's talking about of how that care exists and how that belonging exists.
Yeah. And that the other thing that resonated with me when I read it is that when camps are swept, paperwork disappears. So you might have been working with somebody for a while to get all those documents together to possibly get some housing. And if the camp is swept, or if somebody goes to detox for a week and other people come in and, take some of their stuff or whatever, there's some instability even in the midst of this community. There's just a tenuousness that is really hard. It's hard to watch. It's hard to experience, secondhand. But then after that happens, we find if somebody comes back, people are rallying around and, oh, so-and-so just got back out of detox and needs a sleeping bag. Do you guys have a sleeping bag? I gave him my, a couple of blankets that I had, and can I get him some socks and that sort of thing. So it's just, I can't imagine living my life without walls.
You brought up a point. He doesn't really, he does mention it, but just when someone is experiencing homelessness, they don't have anywhere to put their stuff. So they're either carrying it around with them all the time, or they just don't have anything. And so paperwork, anything that's important, documents, they are gone.
Yep.
And, not that the encampment is ideal, but they have their own space and people watch out and they know whose stuff is where, and they do protect it.
Yeah.
There is a code of conduct in self-organizing structures like that. And, back to your other point, one thing I've noticed, especially in like, I'll call it like the recovery community, there's a fraternity there. I don't know of a better word, but like
Shared experience.
But it's way tighter than just a shared experience. When I see drug court graduates, talking to them, as well as like there's this bond there that's like incredibly tight. And Troy, you work in the drug court alumni association, right? And so like the brotherhood and sisterhood of that, I see that so strongly that it kind of caught me off guard, because I was like, you see them, the way they interact with each other, and it's like, I don't think I've ever had a friend like that. I don't think I've ever had that, but there's a bond there that's like, I see that in, Brooke. I see that in Leah Rader. I see that in so many people that continue to exist in recovery as well as part of that community. That bond is like, it's nothing like I've seen before, I guess. Is that your experience?
Yeah.
And you work a lot with that, that group in recovery. Like how does that affect like your day to day? You're going out, you're trying to provide services. Like, do you feel that bond when you're interacting with somebody who's currently struggling in addiction? Is that a constant, like, I guess I want to say, like, we talked before about pulling people out of a river, right? Like, there's way more people going in the river than can be pulled out of the river. But do you feel that when you do that work in that community?
I feel the bond.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
Is it more personal to you to help somebody get out of addiction?
It's very personal to me. One of the ways I stay clean and I have such a good recovery is because I do give that back. I need to pull them out of the river, so I stay good. If that makes sense.
It's like a mission to, it's community.
It is community.
Purpose.
It's so many things.
So I wasn't planning on necessarily bringing this up, but one of the things I struggled with, hearing certain opposition to the work that Gather does, was this idea that, Gather just wants to keep people in addiction. And as somebody who's been in recovery, like, what do you think when you hear that? Or what do you think when you go out and you try to work these issues?
I try not to think about that. I can get in my head about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's the dumbest thing I've heard. One of the dumbest things I've heard.
I can't imagine how demoralizing it is for telling people, like, a good chunk of Gather staff, half at least, are in recovery. They're out there doing caseworker stuff or various different things, right? And to tell them that they want to keep people in addiction, not only is that like morally offensive, it's actually dangerous to the health and well-being of people who are in recovery.
Yeah. That's another reason why I don't pay too much mind to it. I wouldn't be effective if I'd let that get in my head,
You got, you're always on the move.
I am.
Right. You've been talking. I mean, this is the calmest I think I've ever seen you. It's
chill.
Quite nice. But yeah, so that constant motion for you is a part of the process of recovery, of your purpose, of what you're doing to build that community.
Correct.
And that's why
I want everybody to experience this.
Yeah.
Like yeah. It gets better every day. Every day. I know what most of them are going through.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that
I don't want anybody to stay addicted.
Yeah, you're not
actively.
okay with that.
Not at all.
And you
Not at all.
Yeah, it's so stupid. I'm sorry. I didn't even have to like bring it up, but it was so frustrating to hear. It was so demoralizing and disgusting, really. This idea that that there's some sort of profiting off of keeping people in addiction when you have people in recovery doing that work. It's frustrating. And I see the work that you do. I see the way that you interact with people. Like, you inspire me because I don't understand it the way you understand it. And so like I come to you often, I'll be like, hey, explain this to me, or explain how this works, or what's going on here. Or the one time that guy was smoking something out front, and I was like, hey, can you help me figure out like what to do here? And I watched you go out on the stoop, and you didn't like look down at them. You got down on their level and you talked to them. And it was like a mix of correcting their behavior, as well as you took the guy out to dinner like 20 minutes later. Mm-hmm. Like, it was like this mix of like correcting the behavior and welcoming him into community. Like, and that constant, and it was inspiring to me because there's a lot of, I mean, it's an unknown. It can be fearful. It could be like, there's responses, right? Like, it's very foreign to me, but for watching you get down on their level, talk to them, and like, you were both stern and like obviously opened the door to trying to continue to get them out of that river. Correct. It was inspiring.
Think about it though. I mean, when you think about the concept of recovery, like, what are you recovering? I mean, you're recovering sobriety, but you're also recovering community. You're recovering purpose. You're recovering so many things that were lost to addiction. And those two pieces seem like, community and purpose seem like huge factors. And, you know, something that people don't recognize when marginalized groups are cast in a light that's more marginalizing, you know, like, what do you want from people? Like, they need to know they belong. Correct. And that's something that you model, not just for people who are living in active addiction, but for people who come on the team, like, felt that from the moment I came in. It's like, brother, like, there you go. Like, you're a part of this. Let's go do work. Mm-hmm. You know, well, and everybody's invited into that who's willing to come and be a part of that.
Yeah.
And that's part of the conversation that pisses me off is we only want to help those who want the help. And it's like, that's literally the lowest hanging fruit you could do, you know, versus the slow, long suffering patient walk that I see you exhibit and stuff. Like, I don't think I could ever hear you say, oh, well, I only want to help those who are willing to do the work. Like, you want to help everybody. You want to pull everybody out of the river. Like, everybody does, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of people that don't know they want help.
They
want help, but they don't know how to get it.
Yeah. And it's more than just telling them, go do this, go do this, go do this. If what we're talking about is true, which is it's community.
You're recovering community as along the way as recovering yourself.
Yeah, and we use recovery in terms of addiction, but you know, bringing people out of homelessness is also a type of recovery. I felt like that was really profound. I appreciate that. You guys like paused. I wasn't quite sure where to go with it. Yeah,
we're going to get ahead of ourselves again. But you were going to say something, Patty.
Well, I think we also are recovering hope. There are so many people who say, well, there's this group of people who are service resistant. And they don't use that term, but that's what they're saying. They don't want to be helped. They don't want to be helped. And I'm thinking, oh, they do, but they have to get to a point to trust that maybe this time things might possibly get better because I have somebody who believes that things might possibly get better. And that, even getting to that point, might take a year. We were just talking earlier today about somebody Troy started working with a year ago who is finally at a decent place in the first just baby steps of recovery, but it's taken a year. And it was somebody at the camp, and he's been faithful to be there, to meet with them, to invite them to, you know, take the next step, whatever that is. And I love having Troy and Derek out there on outreach because people will come up who haven't seen them, who knew them when, and say, oh my word, what are you doing? What, you look so good. And both of them will climb out of the rig and say, hey, come on, let's talk.
Right. But it's that caring for the person as a person, not just a means to an end, a project.
Correct.
Like some sort of, notch of, okay, we got this one person, we got them in, we got the actual like caring. And I see that in the community. And I think like in one sense, a lot of this just is common sense. Building community takes intention. It takes time. It takes failure, like having to work with that failure and navigate that. And I guess that all goes back to the title of the book. Grace can lead us home. Grace. Like he relates a lot of this to God's grace that's always consistently, ready to be applied, ready to be grasped, ready to be, acted upon. But there's a very non-coercive element to that grace. And in this work, there's also a very non-coercive element. The best results are the ones where somebody desires to do it. And I've used this example before. I need to find more examples, but like Leah Rader, she had talked about she had been offered drug court. She didn't want to do it. She was fighting it. And then like 2 weeks before her sentence would have been done, she decided to do it. She didn't have to. She could just wait out her time, but she was going to commit to a longer process because she decided she wanted to do it. And this whole, like, we can coerce people into deciding to change their lives, I guess I'm skeptical of it. The things that stick are we've talked about this, the carrot and the stick, right? Like people have to like want the carrot more than avoid the stick to be successful.
Yeah.
So,
well, and if it's I think that even if the stick does play a part, I think ultimately that restoration to community is going to be a major factor in the long term.
Well, that is the point, right? Like to reintegrate people. You talk about reintegrating into society. You talk about recidivism rates and stuff like that. A lot of that is, you can take somebody, throw them in jail. Let's say that they're running with a bad crowd or whatever. But if you don't like reintegrate them into a different crowd or into a different way of being, when you throw them back out at 1201 or whatever it is, right? Where are they gonna go? The network of people that they know, the people that they lean on. It's tricky. How do you turn a whole ship like a culture that's been on a bad trajectory or whatever? Like for some reason, the U.S. or in our particular area, we're just cranking out a lot of broken people. So how do you fix that? I don't think there's necessarily an easy fix, sadly. It'd be nice if there was, but it's that slow work, like Troy, like you're doing out there, just trying to see how many people you can pull out of that river. So,
can I say one more thing?
No, we have to move on. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Well, and the purpose of consistency within the work that Gather does and just being there over and over and over again, and people that's so needed because trust is so difficult. People have hurt people or they've been hurt, and some combination of the two. So when they, in some settings, they don't act the way that they need to, and they are cast aside. So for them to see over and over and over again, no, we're not going to do that. It takes time to build that community back up, that their willingness to participate in community because it's painful, and knowing I'm in a safe place, and knowing that, with Troy, I'm not going to get that, he may think something about what I did, but he's going to be there for me if I reach out. That's so important. That consistency is so important, which I think it plays into the encampment, and why, for those that are service providers, why it does end up being, in some sense, beneficial to have the encampment in one spot.
Absolutely.
Because there's an ability for consistency.
Well, and there's a weird thing at play here that I struggle with, which is this idea that we don't want encampments. We need to squeeze that balloon. Now you're taking something that's a known in a certain place, and now you're dispersing it.
Correct.
Right? So Okay,
whatever,
I feel
they
like
just
our
go
problem
away.
I feel like our problem just got a little bit worse. And likewise, services to meet that and stuff like that are now going to be more challenging. And so he talks about an example, El Sereno, which is example of what he says of encampment being, I guess you'd call it dispersed correctly, which is, what is it? Northeast of downtown LA, Huntington Drive, and El Sereno. And the two lanes, between these two lanes here is this like grassy island. Yeah,
The
basically.
island.
Yeah. And it's huge too, based off of, because he says there was over 100 housed people, close to 100 unhoused people living in this like patch of grass between these two major roadways. And first of all, that's a lot, right? So we've had ordinances, we've had, annexations, we've had all of these things happen in our community. It's a big part of the discussion. We've got, police reports of bad activity going on all the time, all this other stuff. And it's interesting. Like I think everybody feels it. You feel it when you're driving around, whatever. But like Blakesley, for instance, has gotten just a ton of attention where it's at. And part of me understands that. But part of me also recognizes that we're like, what's the population of Lewis County? 80,000 people. And Centralia is 18,000 people of that, right? Average amount of people at Blakesley,
22 to 25,
give or take.
give or take.
And it's like
The ratio is weird, right?
it just feels like, and I get why, because it's visible. It's a visible reminder of dysfunction. So I understand the unease with it. I understand the conditions, all that other stuff. But it's harder when you put it in perspective. And that's only what we see, right? So much more of that dysfunction is going to be going on in our community and people who are also housed or living in cars or RVs or couch surfing or whatever. Were you going to say something, Troy?
No.
There. All right. So they go in and the community works with this El Sereno patch of encampment land. And it looks like there's Union Station, a nonprofit. They were granted by the city to local hotels to serve as permanent housing for the island's residents, which is nice if you can get it. I'll just say that.
We had 2 motels.
They weren't gifted to anybody. I'll tell you that.
Right.
Those were cleared out, and that displaced even more people. I mean, we've talked about that, and that same thing goes. We've had the fires. We've had the Pepper Tree Motel. We've had. They are moving people from certain smaller encampments and stuff like that. So we just have more displaced people than we did 8, 9, 10 months ago. Anyways, but they work. So the outreach teams built trusting relationships and helped move residents into the hotels without ultimatums or coercion. And eventually were able to move out nearly 100% success rate. Now he says nearly because I think there's one factor that we always have to kind of like consider, which is you're not going to get 100% success rate. We never have, not in the history of,
People.
Yeah. There's always been the odd one out that's just not going to integrate necessarily into society, but that it's certainly closer than where it is now. Right. And then, they built on the community's existing sanctity, maintaining clear paths of communication. They were able to permanently house hundreds of people without incident. And then they renamed the buildings to reflect, this community. He said this kind of story should be the norm, not the exception. If we can look at encampments and see not a scourge, but sacred communities of people trying their best to survive, surely we can find creative solutions to build on the resilience and solidarity already present among people experiencing homelessness. In so doing, we affirm that all housing, however temporary, is spiritual. And I think I'm something of a homebody. I like my little mouse hole house. Like I like my space and my whatever. When he talks about housing being like sacred, spiritual, like I really resonate with that. And this is going to be a stupid example, but even as a kid, living in my parents' house, I'd build a fort or something, and this was my space. And I can since I was a kid, I can still feel that feeling of this is mine, right? There's something about that agency that is kind of sacred, that while an encampment is terrible and not an ideal condition, the idea isn't that we need to do things, I don't know how to say this. We can either forcefully put an end to encampments, or we can work to obliviate the need for encampments. It took me a long time to say, sorry. You know what I'm saying? There's two different mindsets. One is to go after the symptom, which is an encampment, or to go after the cause, which is housing affordability, availability, mental health issues, substance use disorder, all that stuff. Two different mindsets, but one is a community-oriented mindset. And I will say that for the problems that Centralia specifically has, we have a really good community. We have people that really care about this stuff. And I'm not talking service providers and people that get, paid to care, or this is their career. I'm talking about there's business owners, there's homeowners here that they're frustrated at the situation because it's a sign of dysfunction, but they're also they have a heart, they have a desire to see this addressed in humane ways, and they want to see people reintegrated back in. I had a friend call me, and I just take a quick break right here for listeners of the long letter. I just like to say, your correspondence, when you reach out to me, when you call me, when you get a hold of me to talk about something I've talked about on the show or whatever, it is so life-giving. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody in the audience that listens, that gives encouragement. It does help when you're talking about these things that are very difficult to navigate. And I had a friend call, and he was saying that he rides his bike down this certain way, and there are homeless people that sleep on the side of the road. And before, he would, just kind of mind his own, move his bike over, and kind of get through it, right? And he said since he's listened to the interviews with people that have dealt with substance use or homelessness or whatever, one thing he started doing is making eye contact and intentionally trying to humanize that relationship. And I was like, those are the stories. Those are the things I really like to hear. It's nothing huge. It doesn't cost him anything, but it's a huge difference if you're homeless and somebody won't make eye contact with you, and somebody does, and they drive by and they're a friendly face. Is it a solution? No, it's a tiny little part of rebuilding community, which is so important to all of these really difficult issues. And yeah, anyways, so just want to thank my listeners for the encouraging words. Keep them coming. They give me life, as well as I'm always constantly trying to think through how I talk about these things. And when people want to have conversations about it while I get stressed, ultimately I'm glad that I do try to constantly listen and make sure that I'm representing things in a healthy way, if that makes sense. So
yeah, I think just kind of what I was thinking about as you were talking, I wasn't listening to what you were saying, but
yeah, no, I got it.
Just kidding. That we do have a great community, and I think there's this kind of split mindset, people who want to protect our community, and so they see threats, and it makes it difficult to look at folks and say, how can we help you rejoin community? And it's why the narrative of they're not from here is so it's so angsty in me, is because I'm like, if you're doing that, then you're saying, no, we don't have to help you. We don't have to invite you into our community. And
it's almost like they're asking, but who is my neighbor?
It's almost like that. And I think that's where from a Christian perspective, I go, let's not ask that question.
Yeah,
like, let's pursue the call that Jesus gave us.
I mean, if a bunch of incredibly wealthy people wanted to move into the community, well, they're not from here. Nobody says that when it's, healthy, type.
Are they healthy or do they just have walls?
Right.
I mean, I ask that.
Money
I say
talks.
that a lot. But seriously, I mean, what would your neighbors say? And I don't mean your neighbors in particular, but if you live in a house and all of a sudden the front wall of your house crumbled and everybody could see inside your house, what would you be doing? What would it look like?
I think you're describing my wife's biggest nightmare. No, just kidding.
But I mean, there's the difference between housed and unhoused is the house. It's not the person necessarily, but we treat it as if it's the person and not the opportunity. I have a home because I have had great opportunities in my life that people we see every week have not had and wouldn't even understand because they wouldn't imagine themselves worthy of such an opportunity that I absolutely took for granted and expected.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I guess the point isn't that I'm like anti-wealthy people moving into the area. It's that the community we extend to them, we should also be extending to others who are here, some out of circumstance that are out of their control.
And they're not coming here because we have services. I mean, let's just put that out there right now. We do not have people being bussed in because Gather has such a good lunch or whatever. And
usually when I talk to somebody who's not, quote unquote, from here, there's a connection here. Mm-hmm. Family member. I lived here for a period of time. I have a cousin or somebody that there's a relation or they were housed here. But yeah. This is our community.
And I mean,
I don't think that's the right question even.
But let's say somebody is bussed here. I'm pretty skeptical of that. I know, like I said, I've mentioned it previously. The one thing that I know that sounds like that a person had told one of our workers was, I used to live over in some other county that shall be unnamed, and they got tired of me being over there, so they put me in a patrol car and they took me over here and dumped me in Lewis County. That wasn't like somebody busing them there. That was law enforcement moving them here. So that's the only.
And that kind of stuff happens to housed people all the time. Maybe not the county got tired of them, but circumstances in that place that they were living in was too hard and they moved, they uprooted, or they got another opportunity somewhere else, a better opportunity.
And I think the key there is opportunity, which I'd like to think of the work that all of these services are doing and that people like our small businesses are doing, and people, they're building community, they're opening opportunities for other things. Like really, it's just like multiplying opportunities for people to get clean, opportunities for people to get housing, opportunity. We're constantly working. Like for our kids, we want opportunities for them, and we negotiate, navigate things to provide them as many opportunities as they can get. Mm-hmm. They may squander those. They may mess up. They may do something. But isn't that what we desire? Is that opportunities to be better or be a better community or be better people? I feel like yeah. And so he shifts here a little bit into marginalized communities. And this kind of touches on, Patty, what you were just saying, that you've had you didn't just appear out of thin air. You have a lineage, a history that goes back of opportunities and things like that. There are marginalized communities that have been denied those same opportunities, perhaps for generations. And while maybe they have those opportunities, or maybe those opportunities are open now,
or better now than they were.
Better now, right?
Hopefully.
The consequences of being denied those opportunities last for generations. He says the demographics of homelessness, when compared to the general population, demonstrate that homelessness does not affect all people equally. This is largely the case because the primary predictor of homelessness, access to affordable housing, has been shaped so profoundly by prejudice. And so he goes into a couple of these marginalized communities, and I think we can kind of touch on these briefly. One is discrimination based on race. And I would encourage listeners that if you don't know what redlining is, to go read about it. That a certain segment of the population was given every opportunity to grow their wealth, to buy their homes, to accrue generational wealth, to develop certain cultural standards and so on, and others weren't for a long time. And then now they can. It does not just all of a sudden
equal out.
Yeah, it doesn't equal out.
The use of the GI Bill was one that I just have been like, wow, that is a fact. And that is something that just, you think about that, how much inequity there was in that.
Yeah. So he says, just so listeners know what you're referring to in the book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. White soldiers returning home from the Second World War were greeted with easy access to no money down, low interest loans to purchase or renovate homes, while black soldiers' access to the same loans was severely restricted. And then we have redlining, the idea that you deny certain services based off of somebody's postal code or area that they live in.
I don't want to rant, but why is it hard for people to recognize
But you're
that?
going to.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know that that's really the point of this topic.
So,
but
hold on. No, I
just
do have
because
something on that, though, because
those are facts. Those are history.
Sorry. The way you said facts and intensely stared at me.
Well, I mean, you did write something significant about facts and anecdotes and things like that.
I don't know what you're referring to. I will say, though, because here's what I think it's... I think that there's sort of, I'm going to call it a myth, and this is probably going to piss people off, and I'm not trying to, so please be gracious with me. But there's this myth that we built ourselves, that what we have can be completely attributed to our own hard work and making right decisions. Now, that is true probably on the individual level for a lot of people. You can really screw things up, and you can really do things well. I know people that have that Midas touch, right? Like everything they do turns into a great investment opportunity or whatever. I think, though, that if you take that individual view and then universalize it, that's where you get into the myth. You ignore other people's experiences or other people's issues, or that there's also a societal thing at play. So if you didn't have somebody, if you're running a race and you don't have somebody kicking your foot every now and then, you do well in the race. You're like, hey, I did good. I ran hard. I did the work. And then you ignore the fact that a few other players had somebody like, trying to trip them, throw stuff at them, or that they're running along a route that's got like boulders in it and they got a clear path. I mean, that's not to downplay an individual's good choices or hard work. That's a good thing to do. But I think this idea that that is being universalized as whatever. So when people are told, hey, part of what you have was provided by a certain structuring of society, they don't like that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to speak to Christians here specifically, that Christians should recognize everything as a gift. We're called to work hard. We're called to do the work. We're called to, whatever. But those are all things, everything that's granted to us is a gift from God, not some thing that we've earned. Like we're not, commissioned to control the earth. We're commissioned to be good stewards of the earth. And that includes how we manage ourselves. So You got me in a rant. Yes, you got me monologuing.
Well, yeah, there's just so many things.
This is going to do it again. You guys aren't getting anywhere.
You just think about that, though, and I think of the fortune I had of buying my house in 2014 right. versus trying to buy a house in 2022 or 23. And that I had no, I didn't do anything to earn that other than I was at that time.
Circumstances, right place, right time.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and there's certain things you could have done by not tanking your credit or whatever. That's one of those individual things that's good.
I could have been like, no, I could wait till it gets lower. I'm going to wait and wait and wait. But no.
Or anyway, you could have been struggling with mental health issue that made it very difficult to navigate life at that time, while it took out years to work out whatever type of medication is going to help you function or getting the counseling you need. You got me monologuing again. You can't. I love that button. I'm going to use that more often. So he says a peer-reviewed study on rental discrimination in 2003 showed that a black applicant with no criminal background is less likely to get a call back on an application than a white applicant with one. And that seems bad. I'm just going to leave that there. And then he says the ongoing practice of housing discrimination means that black people are more likely to be renters, more likely to be rent burdened, which means paying more than 30% of their income, and therefore at greater risk of homelessness. I mean, there's a whole, I think of that here when it's you drive around, you look at the rentals, right? There's only like a handful, not even a handful of companies. There's only a few companies out there that are managing rentals. There's one in particular, and I'm not going to name names, but you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's the thing. Let's say you have some sort of life event, either health or mental health or falling on hard times, losing your job, divorce. I mean, there's a million things that could go wrong, right? And you screw up with that company in this area, and now you need to go find another rental. Tell me how easy it's going to be when they own a good chunk of the rental market management, right? So like these are things that are like self-propagating issues.
Yes.
And I struggle with somebody who says, well, you shouldn't have just had a divorce and, determined that you have schizoaffective disorder.
Yeah.
You should have been more careful not to get,
severe mental illness.
Yeah. Bummer, And that's the thing is like, it's, yeah. Okay. Anyways, moves on, talks about gender. This was fascinating because it says, according to this most recent count, women now make up close to 1/3 of unhoused population. In the book, he talks about them seeing this study and then looking at the population that they serve in their homeless services and realizing that like 90% of their people that are, using services are men. So what was going on if 1/3 of homeless people are women? And what they found was that women are way more, protective and savvy about the way they engage in the community for multiple reasons, one of which is safety. And so what they ended up creating was a Women's Day where all the services were just provided a safe place for women. And I thought that was kind of ingenious because sometimes we don't look at stuff and go, what's wrong with this picture here? Why is it only so many people here? And for them to kind of rethink through that and find it now, of course, I read that and my mind was like, I can see somebody be like, oh, we only help women, huh? You're not going to help all people, sort of thing. And it's recognizing that there are ways that we have to do things that are specific. It's not to discriminate. They're actually trying to address that population. And, talking about women who are dealing with homelessness, he says, additionally, to avoid these types of harm, many unhoused women find it strategic to enter into exploitive relationships or social arrangements. Abuse from a partner who provides even meager shelter, food, or protection may seem the lesser of two evils when compared to the relative danger of going it alone. And that was disturbing to me, that you have to pick one of two really crappy situations.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't come very far since biblical times.
No.
I mean, a woman getting divorced in the Bible has nothing. They get married, they're their husband's property, and the husband can do anything they want. But is it better to be a piece of property and possibly abused or possibly, whatever, or to have to fend for yourself and risk dying? Or you have to become a prostitute, and risk dying.
Comes with its own risk. Yeah, it reminds me of years and years ago, we'll say this, young Mitch, I was teaching a Bible study and we were talking on Bathsheba. And I remember telling this very sweet lady, Brenda, that, Bathsheba's not off the hook here. Mm-hmm. I said this, and I absolutely hate you can see Allison's face right now. I feel the judgment, okay? I'm confessing the sin. Everybody calm down. But the idea that I was trying to put some of that blame on Bathsheba without recognizing the culture in which she existed, not to mention that the king is the king. Mm-hmm. And the king gets to do whatever the hell the king wants to do. I think of that now and I'm embarrassed by that. Like, I hope she doesn't remember that conversation, but if she does, and I hope she listens to this, I'm sorry, Brenda. I was a. No, that wasn't the one I wanted. Hold on. Here we go. There we go. That's what I was looking for.
I like the other one better.
I do too.
That one that actually just worked out perfectly. Anyways,
You're not allowed to edit that out.
but like that's what I'm saying is, if we don't factor in the other things going on here, this is that universalizing one individual thing. We're not recognizing that somebody has to make trade-offs. That includes living in an encampment. That's a trade-off that somebody has to make between other crappier options. So, like, once again, going back to opportunities, are we providing more opportunities for people to make better decisions and get into better things? Or are we just being punitive? Or going for the lowest hanging fruit? Man.
And they could, they could do the Women's Day for a long time, and there would still be somebody who was scared to break off from the destructive relationship that they were in. And it takes time. It probably took them a long time for that to actually come to fruition, where it was starting to be utilized the way that they had envisioned it, because they needed to build that trust.
And they might not ever reach reaching all those people that need it.
Right.
That's why my mom had lived in multiple abusive relationships, and I always knew my mom as a tough person. And she's had some stories that I'm like, they need to make like a movie out of some of the stuff you had to deal with. But I think somebody on the outside would look like, well, why is she with this person? Why doesn't she just leave? Why doesn't she just, and it ignores all of the difficulties of all these crappy decisions she gets to choose from, so, and that's a lot of things. So he goes on to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. This one we touched on a little bit, where when most people are homeless, they're usually homeless in or near the area that they used to be housed. But the only demographics is different than that is LGBTQ, where they have a tendency to leave, to go to a different area due to ostracization, being kicked out of their house, their family, so on and so forth.
The loss of community.
Yeah, we're seeing a thread here. Community is important, and it requires. I like in here. He's I think his background is Nazarene or whatever, which historically hasn't been an affirming denomination. Thank you. But he says, what is he?
He tells the story of talking to the one guy.
Yeah, Eric or whatever his name was. But just recognizing that, like, I liked the fact that he put aside the whole affirming, non-affirming, whatever thing, right? We're talking about how we develop like community, and we talk about how we care for people. The conditional care is something that I've struggled with the church, versus something of like what I'll call like a radical grace. I do think certain people and certain churches function, it's grace, 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 grace. It's grace, grace, grace to get you in the door. To go anywhere beyond that, it sometimes they can lose that grace, grace, grace thing. And that's not to get into the whole affirming or whatever situation. I'm just talking about like how we relate our posture toward other people, especially people that are different or don't hold the same beliefs that we do. When it comes to community, I just have to recognize that people aren't going to conform to my ideas. So we have to figure out how to have community in the midst of that. So,
Well, I would suggest that Troy is grace, 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 grace.
oh yeah,
The way he operates is all about grace. And the people who believe in coercion are, they're really the same people who say that we want to keep people addicted because we make money. And I think they're just seeing the long game as purposeful, as opposed to, it's purposeful because we want people to make better choices eventually, right? But they see it as we're going to prolong this so that we, for whatever reason, make more money. But actually, what
Which is even factually correct. We've already talked about
it's not even close.
the volume or quantity based, whatever.
Yeah.
That's already dealt with.
But it's about grace. I mean, we, as our own community, as our own agency, our vision, our mission, our motivation is grace and love. And it's hard, I guess, to operate from that place and have meaningful conversation with people who don't understand that place.
Yeah, and I think going back to Troy, who's just, you've talked so much tonight, so I don't want to...
Parched.
But that idea of grace, right? Like seeing, like you're not pro-addiction, right? Your desire is that people come out of addiction.
Correct.
You do not, though, end your relationship or base your relationship off of their status in terms of substance use. There's a constant, continual application of that, what we'll call radical grace, to always leave that door open for somebody. So you're ready. When they're ready, you got them. Let's go. I will take you right now. We'll get you here. We'll go here. We'll go here. And I've seen it. Others have seen it in how you relate to using your experience to provide opportunities and grace for others. Any words? That's it.
People showed me grace. People showed me how to live. So I can't judge somebody or you got to do this now. I got to show them how to live by giving them grace, by loving them until they love themselves and see there's a new way of life.
Uncoercibly.
No door slam. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because they have to desire it themselves.
Correct.
But your response isn't based off of their desire at that time. Your response is based off of your care for them as a person.
Correct.
I don't know how to follow up Troy. He's so intense and he's got such an amazing approach. That was a head nod for those who are listening. Okay, so he talks about fostering community. One thing that he did that I actually have always wanted to do and I've never done is holding like short stories group where you have people. So I've done stuff with Gather's Youth where we've gone through a book and talked about it. And that's been like life affirming for me, but I've wanted to do more than that. And so he talks about these short stories that he would read in a group of 10 or 15 people. And then they would have a lengthy discussion. He says studies have shown that reading activates the same parts of our brain as when we are trying to understand someone's feelings. Reading is an exercise in empathy. And I really think empathy is a core tenet of community. It's something that's got to undergird, like we have to have empathy to navigate community, especially when people are coming from different perspectives, different backgrounds, and so on. And so he talks about things that you can do to build community in these little ways. And then he ends with the story of Jesus saying, the poor you will always have with you. And he kind of breaks that down lexically. Anyways, he says...
This part was huge, by the way, for me.
Yeah.
Like that
See, so
last
what he's
section.
basically saying, is that it's not that the poor will always be with you in the sense that there's always going to be poor people, so it's just like whatever, like we can't do anything. He's saying the poor will always be with you, like in person, in your group, in your community, in who, like your inner circle, there are going to be poor people.
You're
Like
always going to be with them.
you're going to be with them, not that they're always going to be with you. Like it's a different way of saying it. And that, yeah, that idea, one is a resignation and one is a recognition that this state's going to exist and should exist in the communities that we exist in.
Yes.
So like it's that idea that you looking in your group and you recognizing that there isn't a representation of like, say, your outer group. Why would that be? What is that saying about you? You know? He says, instead this passage draws us to a better kind of love for the poor, one that is experienced in community. The disciples wonder whether the costly perfume they should have been sold to give money to the poor. Jesus reminds them that the poor should be always with them. Jesus is inviting them out of a mode of transactional giving and into communal solidarity. If disciples of Jesus are always among the poor, in community and communion, the needs of the poor will be recognized and met through mutual aid rather than through the giving of money at a distance. And, he refers to this as what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would call life together. And that's kind of how he wraps that chapter up. And I know that we got in a lot of different topics and stuff. And, but yeah, I thought it was a really good chapter. I think the recognition, just returning back to how we look at encampments, not as, if they are a blight, which they can be a blight, obviously, it's for lack of better options out there.
And the community element isn't the blight. It's the fact that they're forced to live in, that's the existence.
This is the best option out of multiple options that they have right now. And I would love to see no encampments in Lewis County. If it means that those people are living in better situations, better housing, getting services they need, and being reintegrated back in the community. Yeah. That's what I would love to see. I wouldn't love to see encampments be punitively handled and no progress was made on the actual condition of the people that used to occupy those encampments.
So you want no need for encampments in Lewis County.
Yeah, just make them unnecessary.
Yeah.
And right now, I think the sad thing is they're necessary. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be an ongoing struggle. And I recognize that. I think everybody here does. I think most people do. Like I said, I've said it a million times, but nobody's like pro encampment. Mm-mm. It's just a symptom of where we're at right now. And the causes are going to be very complex and take time to address. And we don't have the individual or even the group power to address those. It's going to, once again, going to be a cultural community thing on the whole, like nationally, how we deal with this stuff, I think, is what we're seeing. So anyways, any parting thoughts?
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch.
Calm down.
Thanks, listeners.
Give other people a chance to talk. I just want to thank you guys for being here. I like having more guests and more discussion. Matter of fact, Patty, when we were talking about the homelessness and women, and I was like, yeah, she should be talking right now. Maybe a little less my ideas on what I'm trying. But that's important to recognize. Once again, I'm not universalizing my perspective to everybody else. I recognize that you as a woman are going to have a very different perspective. Troy, you in your history with addiction and stuff, very different approach. Like that's what we need to be doing. That's why I did the interviews. That's why I want to continue to do interviews of people that humanize certain situations that aren't just all, these people we can discard or people that we can not care for. Yeah. And that's a struggle and will continue to be a struggle. So anyways, this is it for the long letter. I want to thank everybody for listening. Continue to send me your messages, letters. If you want to withhold your complaints, I'm fine with that too. And just want to thank my guests for being here today. And
I would say challenge yourself to make eye contact with somebody you don't want to look at.
Oh, yeah.
Try that this week. See what happens. They might look back.
So we had family members that Emily had talked about, my wife had talked to them about, and that issue of making eye contact. And they were at their house one time, and a person was walking down by the front of their house, and they were yelling and just having a whole conversation with themselves. And they just kind of like, hey, you okay? And the person snapped out of it, turned, and they go, oh, hi. And they waved and had a little momentary chat. And then they kept walking. When they got about 50 feet away, they started yelling at nothing again. Like
It's grounding.
it's grounding. It's
Eye contact and human contact can be grounding in themselves.
Yeah. So let's do that. Everybody go out and ground
Not
somebody today.
You may not have that experience, but just
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
worth it.
Well, that's it. Have a good evening.